The male loneliness epidemic. Is it even a real thing? And if it is good urban planning part of the solution? Well, today I'm going full sociologist. I'm digging into a bunch of research to define what the epidemic is, why the focus on men, why it's a problem, what we're trying to do about it, and why what we're doing might not be working. And my ideas on a path forward from the perspective of someone who thinks that good city planning is the answer for everything. First, let's get a few things out of the way. Even assuming the loneliness epidemic is real at all and not a media fabrication, the idea that it should be specific to men is kind of laughable on its face. For centuries, women have typically been much more isolated. Their ability to move through the world has been severely curtailed. But since it's 2025 and men are apparently going through something, now it's a problem. So you're in good company if your immediate instinct is to just dunk on this, but if the male loneliness epidemic is a real thing, and I'm gonna argue here that it is, then the answer can't just be that men need to suck it up. Because as we're gonna see, men just sucking it up is part of the problem itself. Also, and this is a personal peeve of mine, but I want to differentiate between being lonely and being alone because they are not the same thing. You can be at a huge party and feel very lonely and despondent, and it's also possible to be all by yourself and feel extremely fulfilled. One thing about me is I very much like to go out by myself. Restaurants, bars, coffee shops, whatever. Because honestly, most of the time I'm my own best company. That's not meant to be an insult to the other 7 billion people on Earth I could be hanging out with. That's just how it is. And I don't by any means put myself in this category, but history is full of recluses. People who operated best in solitude, but made the wider world a richer, more beautiful place. So just being alone is not what we're talking about. What I want to talk about is the actual problem. And just about everything I've read on this topic since I started really paying attention points to this report, The State of American Men 2023 From Crisis and Confusion to Hope. The report actually has a lot of interesting stuff in it, but can we just pause on how incredibly dramatic the report cover is? It's from an organization called Equimundo, Center for Masculinities and Social Justice, a nonprofit whose mission is to achieve gender equality and social justice, basically by getting men to stop being complete idiots. Okay, that's kind of flip, but once you dig into it, there are some gems. Low-income, non-university educated men are the cultural losers of modernization. I'd almost go further and say they're the cultural losers of modernity itself. Except my thing is, one of the root problems of all of this is that we frame things as a contest where for one person to win, another person has to lose, and I just don't think that's an accurate way to talk about how cities and economies work. Anyway, Equimundo did a bunch of survey work as part of the report, and you can see that some of the responses on whether feminism has been a good thing for society or whether men have it tougher than women are a bit troubling. The report says that some men, in the face of social disconnection and perceived or real downward mobility, see women's advancement in a zero-sum game, holding a quote-unquote replacement theory view that women's gains are at the cost of men. And I think some of this goes to human nature. People don't like to blame themselves. It's psychically much easier to blame someone else when things aren't going your way, and zero-sum thinking always feels intuitively true, even when it isn't. I don't want to discount this sense of downward mobility though, and it's not just economic. I found this interesting from the Survey Center on American Life. In 1990, 40% of men reported having 10 or more close friends, and now that number is 15%. If you look closely, women still have it worse, but men started from such a high baseline that it feels more like they're losing. And I think you can extrapolate that dynamic pretty generally. Also, I love this. My online social life is more rewarding than my offline social life, almost 50%. And the biggest culprit? YouTube. Now I feel bad. All I can really say is these people are watching the wrong YouTube channels, and I just need the algorithm to send them my way instead of sending them to, the Tate brothers or whatever. If a guy has a girlfriend or wife, he deserves to know where she is all the time. There are just way too many people agreeing with this statement. I kind of want to say, if you don't have any close friends, maybe you try not being an insecure jerk who acts like women owe him something. But these are probably the people who are swinging our elections right now. So you won't be shocked to hear that Democrats are currently going to great lengths to learn how to talk to men. Democrats have blown millions of dollars on efforts to appeal to American men who turned to Donald Trump in droves on election day in the hopes of winning back the working class, according to a report. The plan, codenamed SAM, or Speaking with American Men, a strategic plan, promises to use the funds to study the syntax, language, and content that gains attention and virality in these spaces. As the New York Times described it, the reports can read like anthropological studies of people from faraway places. Look, this is all very easy to dunk on, but what do you really expect Democrats to do? It's like there's a structural asymmetry between the left and the right. Democrats have to do an extremely intersectional academic study with an equity lens to try to reverse engineer a whole political strategy, while Republicans can just fund a bunch of vile right-wing influencers who use overt racism and sexism to activate the lizard brains of people who are desperate for someone else to blame for their own unhappiness. It's not a level playing field. I want to bring this back to urbanism though, because the male loneliness epidemic or angriness epidemic or whatever we're calling it isn't just bad for elections, it's bad for society. So here's another report from 2023, this time from none other than the US Surgeon General. Well, the person who was the Surgeon General, also very dramatic. Our epidemic of loneliness and isolation. It's actually a great resource for understanding the upstream causes and downstream impacts of loneliness and social disconnectedness. Also, some amazing assertions, apparently backed by research. Lacking social connection is as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and apparently significantly worse than having 6 alcoholic drinks a day. Okay, now I feel less bad about telling people to go to bars. The report cites links with all kinds of bad health outcomes, but it goes beyond that. Quality of life, education, employment, economic outcomes, and there's a whole piece on the wider social ramifications of the loneliness epidemic. Communities with stronger social cohesion are healthier, more resilient, better at disaster preparedness, they're safer, they have more economic prosperity, more civic engagement, and the governance is more effective. The alarming thing here, and the whole reason for the report, I think, is the bad trends it documents, including only 16% of Americans reporting a strong sense of attachment to their local community. And man, that one just hurts me. People should love the places where they live. The key thing, I think, is they have this infographic that lists all the different factors that contribute to social connection, leaving alone the fact that the visual itself basically suggests that living in a walkable city is the answer. The biggest category of factors, community, is basically a list of stuff I talk about all the time on this channel. It's all city stuff and urban amenities. The Surgeon General's report doesn't really get into gender differences, but there's a lot of survey data out there you can find that does. It isn't even necessarily that men are lonelier than women. As we looked at before, men still report having more close friends, even if the downward trend is stronger than it is for women. And the difference in reported loneliness doesn't vary much between the sexes. It's almost more that men just respond to loneliness differently, and they don't tend to relate to their friends the same way. Women receive emotional support from their friends at twice the rate men do, and this Pew survey shows that women are more likely to get emotional support from pretty much any resource in their community. What's that meme? Men will literally fill in the blank before going to therapy. There's a reason why that's the meme. Okay, in a minute I'm going to talk about some of my personal experience with this and what I think a path forward might look like. But first, usual ways to engage this channel and stay connected. I don't spend much time reading YouTube comments, but I do read just about everything that comes in on my Patreon. So that's maybe a more reliable channel of communication if you want to support the channel directly. Look, all this male grievance stuff is extremely easy to roll your eyes at, and I think it's actually too easy, and it's maybe more productive to try to have some empathy. Me personally, my philosophy on things like acknowledging systemic racism, embracing diversity, and trying to work toward a more just, equitable society is kind of cliche, I guess. A rising tide lifts all boats. Life is not zero sum. Growing the pie means everyone gets more pie if we do it in an equitable way. I am very left-brained though, and I realize not everyone is wired up this way, but I recently had occasion to get a glimpse into what I think is the aggrieved dude mindset. I got invited out to DC to attend a conference for what I'd categorize as liberal-minded creators, which I was skeptical of, but I think it was valuable. Anyway, I was very much in the gender and racial minority. There were all kinds of side meetups specifically for Black creators, Latino creators, AAPI creators, LGBTQ plus creators, all the acronyms, but definitely no meetups for white dude creators. And look, I'm very much on board with the Marxist philosophy on this point, so that's fine. But the conference had a whole lot of grant yourself the confidence of a mediocre white man type talk, and I get all of that. And I'm even on board for the most part, but I could feel a little bit of defensiveness welling up inside me that I kind of talked myself down from. But I think a lot of white guys probably let that kind of feeling fester and even nurture it. I'm not sure what the answer is. I don't know that white dudes demand any special empathy, but I also wonder if your political movement is built on alienating white guys and the people who depend on white guys for their standard of living. It's gonna be very tough to get to 50% anytime soon. And look, there's no doubt technology has made it infinitely more possible to retreat into a world where your most meaningful relationships are online. We live in a DoorDash world where it's increasingly easier to just stay in and cultivate parasocial relationships with YouTubers than it is to go out and have chance meetings with the kinds of cool humans that an algorithm might not direct you to. And I'm not a sociologist, but this thing with young men getting more emotional support from their parents than they get from their friends. Since we're throwing around the word epidemic these days, what about the helicopter parenting epidemic? I sometimes wonder if over-involved parents have done a massive disservice to kids by shielding them from attaching to any other human. You know, it's easy to joke about this dude who went on Jeopardy and stated his occupation as stay-at-home son, but the data I've shared in this video suggests that this kind of dynamic is maybe more prevalent than we'd like to think. And over-involved parents aren't even the main culprits. The arch villain, I think, is housing affordability. It's harder than ever to be a young single person and be able to afford the cost of housing in the kind of city that not only has economic and cultural opportunities, but social opportunities. And if the Surgeon General's report is right, the inability of people to live more socially connected lives is going to lead to worse and worse outcomes for our cities. So here's an idea I want to leave you with. The language and assumptions we carry around about gender are often just way too simplistic. Like, women do emotional labor and men benefit, or you rarely hear the word masculinity without it being preceded by the word toxic. And I found a paper that I thought was pretty helpful and nuanced from the journal Feminist Philosophy Quarterly, which you can probably guess I'm not a regular reader of, although maybe I should be. The paper is by Olufemi Otaiwo, and I probably butchered that, out of Georgetown University, and it's called Stoicism as Emotional Compression is Emotional Labor. I found just the title extremely comforting, so take that for what it's worth, coming from a YouTuber with very low emotional effect. The general idea is that having good emotional regulation is valuable, it is work, it is not toxic, and as long as you aren't an idiot about it, a stoic personality type should be able to carry on a productive, satisfying life and feel valued by society. The paper sets the stage this way. The criticism of traditional, toxic, or patriarchal masculinity recognizes that there is some sense in which the character traits and tendencies associated with masculinity are structurally connected to oppressive, gendered social practices and patriarchal social structures. True, I think, and also this passage on how we talk about emotional expressiveness. It was an error to define men's stereotypical range of emotional expression as the standard against which women's emotional range was judged as hysterical. Agreed. Perhaps it is also an error to reverse the process and set women's range of emotional expression up as the standard against which men's relative inexpressivity is judged. The author explores this idea of emotional compression, which he compares to the way a sound engineer uses audio compression to boost quieter sounds and temper louder ones to achieve a stronger overall composition. I found this passage really impactful. Emotional compression is used by the boxer who knows and respects his fear, yet not only stands his ground and keeps punching, but does so without letting on that he is intimidated. By the person who fights back tears during a tough conversation with her friend and speaks in measured terms that communicate her hurt feelings through the verbal content of what she says, rather than the tone of voice or her tear ducts. And also by the soldier who dutifully withholds complaint about an onerous task demanded by his commanding officer. The whole paper is a good argument for the value of Stoicism, but also differentiates it from characteristics that actually are problematic, like lack of emotional self-awareness and emotional unavailability. All of those things are often conflated together, and I think that's part of the problem. What I'm saying is, I think it's okay to be a guy with low emotional affect. It doesn't mean you don't feel things, and it doesn't mean you aren't an empathetic person. And I hope the fact that this YouTube channel exists at all is some evidence of that. So make no mistake, watching urbanist YouTube is extremely important, but at the same time, I do encourage people to leave the house and get out into the world. It's good for society, it's good for your mental health, and honestly, it's not that much effort. You might have to shave, and I realize shaving is one of those things that feels like the less time you spend thinking about it, the better. Like, if you were born after, say, 1970, there's a very good chance your first razor was a multi-blade cartridge or disposable razor, and you haven't spent a lot of time evaluating whether that's really the best option. I get it. Life is full of small decisions that sometimes we don't even realize are decisions. So you slide on by, tolerating the skin irritation of a mediocre shave, the absurd ongoing costs, and the billions, yes, billions with a B, of disposable razors that go into landfills every year, just in the US alone. Well, today I want to shake up your thinking on this with a personal care item that's revolutionized the way I treat my skin, and it comes from today's sponsor, Henson Shaving. So here's the thing. When you buy a cartridge or a disposable razor, the blades often aren't supported or stabilized well, which leads to skin irritation and mediocre results. Think of anything else you'd cut with, like scissors or a good kitchen knife. The last thing you want is for a kitchen knife to flex while you're trying to cut with it. Same idea. The Henson razor, though, it is super precise. It's an aluminum safety razor that's built to very tight tolerances, securing the blade at a 30-degree angle with 0.0013 inches of blade exposure, which is going to give you an optimal shave. Also, there's no plastic involved, including the packaging, and a Henson razor is really the opposite of disposable. It's built to last a lifetime. And this part is important. Henson is not a subscription service, so they're not trying to send you monthly cartridge shipments. Instead, Henson's idea is you have one really good safety razor, and then double-edged blades that cost next to nothing. And that's really what sold me on it, the cost of ownership, and you know I love to chart this stuff out. Yes, the upfront capital cost of a Henson razor is a bit higher than what you'd pay up front for a cartridge razor, but the blades for the Henson run about 10 cents compared to $2 to $4 each for cartridges. So it only takes about 6 months for the Henson to come out ahead, and it's all gravy from there on out. The other thing I love about Henson, they have a pandemic origin story, just like this channel. In 2020, the pandemic forced their family-run aerospace machine shop to pivot in a new direction, and now they make these incredible razors in a shop in Canada that also made parts for the Mars rover and the International Space Station. And that's really a big key to what they do. Their machinists are exceptional, and that level of precision is one of the big reasons the Henson razor is so much gentler on your skin. What I want you to take away from this is you don't need like a 5-blade cartridge with a moisturizing strip. You just need a single blade safety razor that's extraordinarily well engineered. The Henson razor is already an amazing value as it is, but if you use my code at checkout, they'll include 100 free blades in your order. So if you want a great shave with a very cool space-age safety razor that'll save you money year after year, go to hensonshaving.com/CityNerd and enter CityNerd at checkout, and your face or whatever it is you're shaving will thank me. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons for your direct support. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.